Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to today's video, which is going to be a very fun video. I saw Chandler Ainsley post a video that she got inspired to do from makeup YouTubers, and she modified it to a book video where she gave her top 3 recommendations for every romance trope or romance subgenre. And I loved that video idea. I do not read nearly enough romance to do exactly that, but I do read really widely across almost every genre. So I am going to do my version today, which is my top 3 recommendations for every genre. I'm probably missing some genres, but I do have 10 different genres or categories of books written down that I am going to kind of rapid fire my top 3 recs for. I say rapid fire for a couple of reasons. One is that personally, I am just on a time crunch right now. I am about to leave later today for a personal vacation / work trip, which I'm very excited about, but I want to have some content scheduled for while I'm gone. So I want this video to not be an hour long, but also because of the name of this video, it's pretty self-explanatory. These are my top recommendations. These are the best of the best, my absolute favorites. So I love all of these books, and I don't think I need to reiterate that with every book I talk about. I'm just gonna give you a little snippet as to why you might enjoy these books as well. So if that sounds good to you, stay tuned. I will have the genres or categories I'm talking about down in the description. So if you wanna jump around to the specific genres that speak to you, feel free to do that. But we're gonna get right into it. Let's start with just general contemporary. And we're gonna start with one of my favorite books of all time, which I know all of these kind of are, but this is within my top 3. It is Happiness Falls by Angie Kim. This is a contemporary book that is also a little bit of a mystery. When the main character's father goes missing, and the only person who knows what happened to him is her brother, who has Angelman syndrome and is therefore non-speaking. My next recommendation is a book I read just this year, but has really stuck with me. It's Pictures of You by Emma Gray. This is a dark, kind of emotional contemporary book about a woman who is in a car accident, and through that accident loses her memory and also her husband, but she doesn't really remember her husband, and with that doesn't remember reasons that their relationship was not the best. So she's kind of mourning this husband she never knew, but also learning what happened recently in her life. As with Happiness Falls, it's kind of solving a mystery, but it's much more contemporary feeling than mystery feeling. So that's why it's in this category. And then the last recommendation I have within the contemporary genre is a book I read several years ago. It's actually a book that my husband read and recommended to me. It's called The Art of Fielding by Chad Harbach. This follows a bunch of characters who are on a collegiate baseball team together. So yes, this book is about baseball, but it's about much more than baseball. It's really a deep character study into each of these characters' personalities. And I just remember being extremely emotionally invested by this book. So highly recommend it if you like general contemporary type books. The next genre or category we're going to get into is contemporary romance. And actually I have contemporary heterosexual romance, and then I also have queer romance as its own section. So to start with heterosexual, we can start with Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This is the first book in a 3-book series following 3 different friends and their romances. This is my favorite of the whole series, but I love all of them. This follows a couple who is divorced after a tragedy struck their family and their second chance romance. Very emotional. My next recommendation is Heard It in a Love Song by Tracy Garvis Graves. I have read a few different books by this author, and I think I've really loved all of them. But this is also a romance between 2 older main characters who have like complicated life situations, and also this has a musical element to it if you like that. And then my third heterosexual romance recommendation is a recent read, The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I read this earlier this year, and this is just a very fun, like juicy, gossipy romance between 2 figure skaters. And it spans a very long period of time. So if you like long, messy love stories that also have like a sports element to them, then this could be for you. And then for queer romances, I've got a few. So the first one I have is Stars in Your Eyes by Case and Callender. This is a male-male love story between 2 men who are in the Hollywood acting industry, and they're kind of set up together as a PR stunt, but then it turns real. Also very emotional. I do tend to enjoy emotional romances just as a general rule or trend. My next recommendation is also a male-male romance called Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly. This is about two men who are separately hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, but they meet up and decide to do some of the hike together. And then my third queer romance rec, I'm realizing right now, is not contemporary romance, but I'm keeping it in because it's Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is much more marketed as a historical fiction book, but I loved it for the queer romance between two of the women in this space program together. Also very emotional, surprisingly emotional, I guess, and I loved their love story. Okay, my next sort of genre of books are speculative books. So I'm not a person who reads a lot of fantasy. I don't have fantasy included in this video. So high fantasy, romantasy, you're not gonna find that here, but I do love a lot of books that are mostly contemporary feeling, but have some sort of unexplained speculative element to them. You'll see what I mean here, but my first rec is The Measure by Nikki Erlich, another book that I would consider in my top 3 favorites of all time. This probably is number 1 if I'm being honest. But this is about the question of what happens when everybody in the entire world wakes up one day and they have a box on their doorstep that contains a string that correlates to how long their life is going to be. And it explores that question and idea so much more thoroughly than I could have ever expected. I loved it so much. Then we have Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. This is kind of a young adult speculative book that has a Groundhog's Day time loop situation to it. So it's about this group of 5 teens who go to this like cabin in the woods, and they find out they're living the same day over and over again until they come to an agreement on which one of them will not make it out of the day alive. So they live it over and over again until they decide that. And then my third speculative recommendation is another book that I read quite a while ago but has really stuck with me, called The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. This is about a young woman, like a teenage girl, who has recently lost her mother to suicide, and she believes that her mother is coming back to her reincarnated as a bird. And that's the first of a few different speculative elements that weave into this super emotional young adult magical realism book. Okay, then I have 3 recommendations for historical fiction. The first was my favorite book of all of last year, so probably not much of a surprise, but it's The Women by Kristen Hanna. This follows a woman who is an army nurse in the Vietnam War. I have loved almost everything that I've read from Kristen Hanna, but this is my favorite book by her. Then we have a recent read. I just read this like 1 or 2 months ago. It's The Lion Women of Tehran by Marjan Kamali. This is a story about 2 women who live in Iran, and they have a very complicated friendship situation together. And we see how their friendship changes over time through years of political turmoil and some differing kind of opinions they have or actions they take within that situation. And then my third rec, I don't for some reason have my physical copy. I might be lending it out to my mom, or I'm just blind and can't see it on my shelves behind me, but it is Take My Hand by Dolan Perkins Valdez. This is set in the southern United States in the 1970s and follows a nurse who is involved in a court case situation related to like women's bodily autonomy. So extremely relevant today, more so than you would think for a historical fiction book, but very, very moving for sure. All right, then we're going to move into mystery thrillers. I actually separated this into 2 categories. So the first is what I would call just straightforward mysteries, not much thriller elements to them. The first one is The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum. This is probably the book that I would put in my 3rd slot of top 3 favorite books of all time. But this is all about the mystery of this elite classical musician when his $15 million violin is stolen. So we solve that mystery, but we also learn a whole bunch about him as a person and his upbringing, what brought him to having a $15 million violin in the first place. Then we have a very classic murder mystery book called The Enigma of Room 622. This is a translated book set in Switzerland, I think, and translated from French, but it's about this murder that happens in room 622 at this hotel and everything that led up to that event who's responsible, who died. That's not even revealed until, I don't know, halfway through the book or something like that. But this has a really good twist to it that I loved reading. And then thirdly, we have This Book Will Bury Me by Ashley Winstead. This one is towing the line a bit between mystery and thriller, but this is all about kind of the subgenre of true crime and how sensationalized true crime cases are. And this follows a main character who is a young adult woman who, through the death of her father, gets involved in the online true crime community and finds herself in this huge rabbit hole trying to solve mystery after mystery of true crime cases. So I loved it. I have loved multiple Ashley Winstead books, but this is probably my favorite by her. It's also her most recent release. And then getting into thrillers, I tried to pick out some less hyped thrillers. I know there are some that are just absolute staples to everybody, which I also agree with. I'm thinking like Gone Girl. It's iconic for a reason, but I don't want to put it in here as a recommendation if everybody who loves thrillers has already read that one. So first I'm going to recommend The Last One by Will Dean. This is about a woman who is going on a cruise with her, I think her new husband, when all of a sudden she wakes up one morning and everyone on the entire cruise ship is gone. And this book is so fun, so thrilling. Then I have a bit of an unpopular opinion, or I don't know. It's a thriller that I loved that I've seen some of my friends not love as much, but I am here to vouch for it. And it's Breathless by Amy McCulloch. This is about a woman who is a reporter and she decides to follow this super elite mountain climber in climbing a mountain and reporting on it when dead bodies start showing up on the journey. So she is trying to not only solve the mystery, but also stay alive herself. And I personally loved the wintry, mountainy vibe of this one. And then my third thriller recommendation is What Lies Between Us by John Mars. This is one of John Mars' more underrated books, or underhyped, I should say. I don't hear a lot about this one, but this is the type of thriller that like every chapter leaves on a cliffhanger. So I just remember being absolutely riveted reading this book and finishing each chapter and immediately needing to go into the next one to find out what was going to happen next. All right, we're going to take a turn into nonfiction, which is a genre I've recently been reading more and more of. The first book though is a book I read several years ago, and immediately when I read it, I thought this is the best nonfiction book I've ever read. And it's called Leadership and Self-Deception by the Arbinger Institute, which looks and sounds like the most boring book ever. I know. However, what's inside here is great. It is kind of a businessy type book, but it's the type of book that applies to life in general. And it's written as a fictional narrative, which I remember really loving. We're basically following a main character who is a manager at this tech company or something. And he's put through this training program and he's learning the concepts taught in this book and he's applying it then to his real life, and we see it play out. And I don't know, I'm due for a reread of this book, but there are multiple concept and lessons in here that I think about probably on a weekly basis that like actually influence how I act and how I think about things. Like things about what my kids do and how I react to what they do, also to like my business life and my career. So I really liked it and it stuck with me, and I've recommended it to lots of people who are looking for like businessy self-help type books. On the completely other end of the spectrum, my second recommendation is called Running While Black by Alison Mariella Desir. This is a book that combines sort of the history of running and how running is now considered a primarily white sport, but how it began with Black people and has a really rich Black history, along with the basically dangers of running as a Black person today. So it includes a whole bunch of commentary on racism, and not only racism towards individuals, but also like the racism of the running industry, which is something I had no prior knowledge about, but was really eye-opening, interesting, riveting, angering, all the things. I loved this book. I cried while reading this book. I also listened to this book while running, which was a great experience. I just highly, highly recommend it. And then my third nonfiction recommendation is a memoir, which I also read somewhat recently. It's Someday Now by Tembi Locke. I talked about this one in a recent video, so honestly I feel like I should just link that because it has my in the moment thoughts. But this is just a beautiful memoir. It's actually the second memoir by this author who lost her husband some years ago. The first memoir covered her like immediate grief, and then this book is several years down the line, and it's still about her grief, but it's more about like her long-term experience of moving on, finding joy again, finding joy for her family. this was beautiful and it was great specifically in audiobook format. All right, then we're going to move on to science fiction, which was surprisingly my most difficult genre to narrow down for this video. Again, I didn't want to feature authors and books that I know already get a ton of hype, so I'm not going to talk about Andy Weir, though I do love Andy Weir and Project Hail Mary specifically, nor am I going to talk about Blake Crouch, though I do also really love Blake Crouch. If you like those books by well-known sci-fi authors, you might want to try these ones. First of all, Dissolution by Nicholas Binge gives really strong Recursion by Blake Crouch energy. So if you like books that deal with like time travel-y stuff, then you might like that one. Sci-fi books are a little hard to describe because sometimes if you give away the sci-fi element, you give away a big twist or reveal of the book, which is also the case for this one, The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy. This is a sci-fi book, but I can't say why because it's a big twist. But I had so much fun reading that book and discovering what the twist was. And then my third recommendation is a sci-fi book set in space that is also a queer romance and is so much more emotional than you think it's going to be going in, but it's The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer. Multiple different sci-fi elements going on in this book as well. And then last but not least, my last little category to talk about today is not really a genre as much as it is an age range. I wanted to feature some young adult books that I absolutely adore. First, we've got Slay by Brittany Morris. This was my favorite book of the year in probably 2022 or 2021. I don't remember for sure, but this is a young adult sci-fi contemporary book about a Black teenage girl who has created an online video game for Black players that strongly emphasizes like Black terminology and vernacular within the game itself. And there is a little bit of a sort of mystery element introduced when somebody is basically trying to come for her game. Then we have a young adult historical fiction book called As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Kato. And this is set in Syria. We follow a young woman who is trying to keep her family safe during the Syrian Revolution. Super, super hard-hitting, emotional, all the things, but really nicely put into a young adult package. And then my final recommendation of this video, my final young adult recommendation is Heroine by Mindy McGinnis. This is about a high school softball player who has an injury that leads her to becoming addicted to her painkillers. I read this book years ago. I have also reread it since then. It held up. I love just like the grittiness of this book, and I don't know if it's because I was a high school softball player or what it was that connected with me so deeply about this book, but I just loved it. So that is it. Those are my 3 recommendations for 10 different book genres. Please let me know if you have also read any of the books that I mentioned here. What were your thoughts on them? Please tell me you also loved them. If you haven't read any of them or all of them, let me know which ones, if any, I convinced you to pick up. And because why not, let me know your recommendations. If you read books in any or all of these genres, I would love to hear your top 1 to 3 recommendations in them because I love these books and I'm always looking for more books like them. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video and I will see you in my next one.